My name is Sylvia Faith, and I am a teacher and tutor with Bespoke Education, and I'm so pleased to have you here with us this evening for what is our first ever Ask Us Anything webinar. We have some really fantastic folks here to talk with you this evening, but before I introduce them, I'm just going to give a really brief overview of what we do and what we offer at Bespoke Education. We are a tutoring company first and foremost. We offer academic tutoring across all ages and all subjects. We offer remedial support. We also offer enrichment tutoring for students who want something beyond what they are getting in the classroom. In particular, we specialize in test preparation. We tutor all of the admissions tests, everything from the primary level IC up through the GRE and beyond. We've been doing that for over 20 years, so we really do have a tremendous amount of expertise. In addition to our tutoring, we offer executive function coaching, where we work with students on what we like to call the invisible curriculum of school. These are the skills that students really need in order to thrive in the classroom that are almost never explicitly taught. These are things like organizational skills and study skills and things that may come really naturally for some and not so much for others. And so we want to make sure that all students have those tools in order to thrive. We're really proud of our Bespoke Education Access Program, which allows us to partner with different charter, public, and independent schools, as well as non-school partners in under-resourced communities in order to offer those students the same kind of expert small group tutoring, private tutoring, and classes that we have been offering our students for those 20 plus years. Finally, we have an incredible team of folks who work with kids on college admissions, an extraordinary essay writing program, and interview coaching. And we also partner with college admissions coaches as well to get our students set up for success as they apply to college. But we are here this evening, for any of your questions, but in particular to talk about the SAT and the ACT. And I want to welcome our panelists for this evening to introduce themselves and say a little bit about the work they do with Bespoke. We have our founder and CEO, Tim Levin, here, and our COO and head of tutoring, Dan Cousins. Tim, I'm going to start with you. Will you please introduce yourself, share your unique Bespoke journey, and tell us a little bit about what you like working on these days?
Super. Thank you, Sylvia. It's hard for me to sum up the company better than you just did. It's really great to have everybody here. This is the first AMA or Ask Me Anything that we're doing on the topic of test prep. As Sylvia said, this is our 21st year. I'm really proud of what Bespoke has accomplished. We have a total team, including here in the US and also over in Europe, of nearly 300 people. We are working with thousands and thousands of students each year, privately and in groups. And it's just an amazing company, and it's just really great to see how it's grown. As Sylvia said, our specialty and that we've been doing since the beginning is test prep, and that's what we're here to tell you a little bit more about tonight.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, my name is Dan. I joined the company as a tutor in the fall of 2006, so quite some time ago. It's been a real privilege to be here throughout, working both in the tutoring side and then more recently with the tutors themselves, hiring, training, strategy for the company, and really trying to keep us current. This is one of the most change-laden times in the history of test prep. Both tests have changed just a vast amount in the last 3 years. And so it has been a full-time job just staying up to date on what's happening, how these tests are changing, the content, the curriculum, and then what we can do in order to deliver that to our students, both in the one-on-one setting and also in our classroom and in the curriculum that we've created. So that's part of what's been so exciting lately is I'm working with students. It's keeping me fresh, keeping me really connected to the content and helping me stay aware of how best to tailor this stuff to our students and for the families.
Thanks, Dan. So I have to train you all a little bit on how you will be the most important ingredient in this conversation this evening, and that's how to ask your question. So we've got a couple options there. We have the chat, which you can see on the side. It's like a normal Zoom chat. But those questions, if you ask them in the chat, which you are welcome to do, they go directly to us, the hosts and panelists. And so your fellow attendees don't get to see them. Our suggestion would be, with that in mind, to use the Q&A function, which is down at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, it has a little thought bubble, and that is your opportunity to ask questions in a public manner. You are welcome to ask them anonymously if you are more comfortable doing so, and I will be sort of looking at those questions, serving them up to Tim and Dan. I almost called you Dan and I almost called you Tan and Dim, which is not correct.
I love it.
But and then also chiming in myself because I can't help it, and we will just begin moving the conversation in that way. We also have a poll. We want to know who's here with us this evening, so I'm going to launch that right now. Go ahead and just let us know what grade you're in or your student is in, and then you can go ahead and X out of it so that you can see everybody's faces. It's helpful to us to know who's in the room. It'll help us steer the conversation. I see lots of 11th graders, which is fantastic. So as everyone is getting settled and getting ready to ask their questions, can I start, Dan, by asking you to guide us through these tests a little bit? I'm gonna get some slides up and you can talk us through kind of the general important information about where they stand these days.
Yeah, we've been giving a lot of these presentations to schools, to parents, and some of our other webinars, and we found there are some kind of very common questions. So just to clear the air, I want to get this informational aspect about these two tests out there up front. As I said before, this is the most changing time in test prep that we've seen. The ACT is changing more this year than it ever has before. The SAT went through another cycle of change over the last 2 years, which is, I would say, probably one of the biggest changes that test has gone through, even though it does change every 5 to 6 years. So I just want to give folks a little bit of information up front on what's going on with these tests. I'm going to start with the ACT, as you will see here. The way this grid is organized is the sections of the test down the left-hand side, and then you've got some data about those sections to the right-hand side. Something you may hear us say again and again tonight is one of the upsides of standardized tests is indeed that they are standardized. The sections always appear in the same order. They always look more or less the same. That's one of the things we counsel our students on. They come to rely on it so they can focus their cognitive energy on what they need to focus on, which is solving the problems rather than trying to figure out the shape of this test. So the test order remains the same. You've got an English section, then a math section, then reading, then science. But what the test has done across the board is they have cut down the number of questions, except in the science section, and they have also cut down the amount of time you're going to spend. But in the way they've cut them differentially, they've actually given you more time per question on every single section. So this is something students are enjoying. The issue is we don't yet know what colleges are going to say about this optional science section, whether they're going to ask for it or not. So we've got it in blue here. It is optional, but our overall recommendation is that students continue to prepare for it and they continue to include it in their test. So yes, the test is shorter, but it's not actually that much shorter with this science section. The essay is truly optional. It has been truly optional for several years now, and that doesn't seem to have changed. Let's go on to the next slide just to talk about the rollout here, because that's another one we get a lot of questions on. The ACT is rolling this out in pieces. They've started making their online tests this new enhanced version. That started in April, and it will continue through this summer with the tests in June and July, the online tests being enhanced, but the paper and pencil tests still being the old version, what we're calling classic here. Then in September of this year, both the paper and pencil and the online tests will become enhanced. You will still, if you're taking the test during the weekday in your school, it will stay classic and it will continue to be classic through the early part of next year. Then finally, in April of 2026, every single version of the test that students are taking here in the States will be this enhanced version. To simplify, we've got some advice. Take the test on paper and pencil if you possibly can. It really serves you to be able to look at the test, to be able to mark it up, to be able to track a data table with your pencil, to be able to underline things in a reading passage. We've seen this online version doesn't serve that kind of engagement quite as much. Prepare for the science until we get word from our college admissions professionals, which way the college admissions offices are going, and then sign up for the essay truly if it will serve you. And if it won't, then don't. I'm going to go on to the SAT, the other test. It's a shorter test. It's just a little bit more than 2 hours. The structure is a little bit more simple. There's no science, and they've combined the reading and the English of the ACT into one section called reading and writing. But it is broken down. There's questions that are more about your reading skills and questions that are more about your writing skills. Those come first. They're broken into 2 modules. And as you'll see, it is far fewer questions and a far shorter test than the ACT. Then, depending on how you do there, you get a score 200 to 800. Then you get a break, and then you move on to the math. And the big question we get here is, how did the SAT pull it off? How do they have such a shorter test compared to what they used to have, and also compared to what the ACT currently has still? I'm going to show you that on this next slide. They did this through something called a section adaptive structure. What this means is that the test changes depending on how the student answers. And I'll talk you through just for the reading and writing, which you'll see on the left side of your screen there. Students are given, the first thing they sit down to is a reading and writing module that consists of easy, medium, and hard questions for an average difficulty level of medium. Depending on how they do, typically they need to get about 20, 22, 23 questions or more correct. If they get those many questions correct, they'll get routed to the hard second module, where it's really mostly medium and hard difficulty questions. If they don't cross that threshold, they will get routed to the easy module. Why has the test done this? It's so they can ask fewer questions and learn more about the student. If they know that a student is getting half the questions wrong in that first module, they're not going to learn anything more by giving them hard questions. They know they're going to get all of them wrong. So they give them easy questions to see where in that lower range that student ranks. Similarly, if they get every single question right on the first module, they're not going to learn anything more by giving them easy questions. They need to know where they rank on that harder range. So that's how the adaptivity works. Students are approaching these in different ways. There's a lot that goes into our recommendations for which test a student should take. So let's stop the share there. We'll see if there are any questions on that, or, as we've said, on anything else.
All right, we have our first question. And I would love to hear from both of you about this. Like, feel free to share this together. What do students actually think about these tests? And I would add to that too, like, how do we determine who takes what and why? Tim, do you want to start us off since we haven't heard from you in a little bit?
Sure. Thank you for that great presentation so far. This is the SAT now has the new online version of the SAT has now been out for several years. I think students who take it actually really like it. They're very comfortable with the online version. They're very comfortable with not doing something paper and pencil. I think, and I imagine that when the ACT fully moves over to an online version and not paper and pencil, students are going to be very comfortable with that as well. I think, my general sense is that students and families don't love the actual periods of change. And so I I would imagine, just as Dan is recommending, which I think is smart, take the paper and pencil ACT while you can. There's tons of practice for decades. This test has been around since the 60s. And so tons of practice. There's a lot less practice for the online version. Now with the College Board, there's tons of practice for the online version. So I think, the period of transition is difficult. And I think if you're someone who's going to be looking to take the tests in the next year or two, you might actually move more to the SAT, because the ACT is in this transition that needs a little bit more clarity before, people will feel more comfortable with it. But I think as we'll discuss, a lot of whether you take one test or the other comes down to what test feels better. There are some differences. There are differences in how the questions are phrased, how long they are. There are differences in the math. There are differences in, just the structure of the test, the timing of the test. And so, a lot of this is going to come down to what you think you can do better on, when you're starting to go through it.
I will jump in there. I think students love the SAT partly because it looks really good. The College Board has done a great job. It is a professional looking test. It's smooth. The calculator flows nicely to the left and right when you bring it up. It's like it looks really polished. And they've done a great job of packaging this product, making it make sense, and also playing to students' interest in not reading really, really long passages. On the SAT, on the reading and writing, there's one question per passage. So students read a chunk of text. It might be quite a long piece of text, and then they answer one question about that text. And then when they move on to the next question, there's a new piece of text. And students like that. On the ACT, you have to read for English and reading and science. You have to read a pretty big piece of text and then answer several questions about that. So I think students are drawn to some of the cosmetic elements of the SAT. I've seen students who might be better served by taking the ACT, who still want to take the SAT because of those cosmetic elements. And so I'll sometimes need to kind of show them in session with practice problems that, hey, actually, maybe the ACT is a better test for you. What we've seen, the SAT, there's some very challenging math problems. They're sort of at a tuned to a higher cognitive level than some of the ACT math. And similarly for the reading comprehension on the ACT, there are some chunks, some of those passages are really dense. They're about some obscure scientific topic that you've never heard about. And there's something that must be disproven in order to be positive. It's like these reversals, something that's positive to be negative, a triple net. There's really complicated ways that you have to understand that reading. So some students may be served more by the ACT, but they have to get over that cosmetic challenge.
I think we're always looking for how do we match the thinker to the test. And what Tim is saying about this moment of transition is really important. And it may be that if you are more of an ACT thinker, you do go ahead and make sure to take that paper test while you can. And I think a really important difference between these tests is that the SAT, especially in this form, is really about depth. Like that passage that Dan is referring to might be fairly short, but it's really, really dense and sophisticated. Same with a math problem that might look like one thing on the surface, but you really have to be able to untangle it, and it's going to be complex. Whereas the ACT is more about breadth. So lots of different topics, being able to go through a lot of information quickly. If that's the kind of thinker you are, play to your strengths, but try to do so in a way that unburdens you of the challenges of a transitional time as much as you possibly can. We have a question about where to find these ACT practice questions. Dan, I know you're very up to date on all of this. Can you talk us through it a bit?
Yes, I just sent an email to our entire company all about this very thing. So there are some official sources and then there are unofficial sources. So let's talk about the official side first. The ACT has released 5 sample practice tests. You can go to their website, you look for the enhanced ACT practice. They released one test in December, which was kind of their proof of concept. It showed what the new test was going to look like. And then they just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, they released their red book, which is, they've published that for years, but they released their 25-26 updated version, which is now updated for the enhanced ACT. And that has 4 tests. There are a few caveats for that book. One is there's some not just misinformation, it's mistakes. The answer sheet in those books still has 5 answers for math instead of 4, and has more questions than are actually on those tests. That book will also tell you that the new composite is calculated from the average of all 4 sections, which it is not. As you saw earlier, it's calculated from the 3, English, math, and reading. So the questions there are great. Just take what you read elsewhere in the book with a bit of a grain of salt. Those tests are all taken from previous ACTs, tests that the ACT released in the last 15 years or so. They've just been reduced down to match or to kind of to fit this new structure. So that's what you've got on the official side. Then you will find companies such as Bespoke have created tests to also provide this practice. So we now have 4 of our ACTs that we've cut down. They are matching the new format. They're both online and in person. So you can take it on paper and pencil or on the Bespoke digital testing platform. And those are pretty great practice. The caveat is that the ACT has not been very forthcoming about the scoring and scaling rubric for these tests. So they've shared a few examples of how the tests will be scaled and scored. We've tried to match those with our scaling and scoring, but as with any test practice, we're saying let's focus on the number of questions that you're getting right, less so than on are you getting a 32 or a 33, or in the case of the SAT, an 1150 versus an 1170. Work on getting the questions right.
The other thing I'll add here is, when the SAT first came out, they piloted in Europe for the first time, and we have an office in Europe. Work with a lot of European kids who take the SATs, and those students did off the charts well on the first iterations of the test. We remember being very surprised, pleasantly surprised. So were they, and we couldn't figure out. Maybe it was sort of a bit of a game with the College Board to make a good name for themselves. They came out with this new online test. And then, we saw the test become much harder. The practice materials online became harder. The College Board adjusted it. Students started having a bigger distribution of scores, doing worse than that first iteration. So actually, the students who were sort of the guinea pigs and took the test for the first time when it first came out actually did great, because no one kind of knew what was going on with it, especially the College Board. So I think there's a possibility, if you have a student who's a little bit intrepid and who's okay with taking a little bit of a risk here, taking that online ACT at a time when there is not a lot of information about scaling, there's not a ton of questions yet, could actually be advantageous. I think we just don't know yet. Now, looking back, we can tell you should have taken the SAT when it first came out. Maybe the same thing will be true of ACT. We don't know.
I'll also say, given how little the content of the test has changed, as you'll see, every single question on these new enhanced ACTs is taken from past ACTs. So given how little the content has changed, there are still many, many practice tests of the old or classic version of the test out there. Students should feel great preparing with them because it's the same skills and the same content being tested.
Yeah, and I just want to offer a little bit of summarizing information for our attendee who asked that question, who lost signal briefly, but has rejoined us, that look, the SAT has released their red book which is their official practice materials for 25-26. It has some flaws. So the questions are super useful for practice, but there are some errors in the answer key and in the information given. And then we also at Bespoke work on creating those models ourselves. And so we have a a tremendous amount of practice material available as well. And as Tim was saying too, it's in this time of transition, it could be that there is some advantage to be found for the students who take this test. Some kind of thank you for bearing with us of it all as we learn this, that we could see as we did with the SAT, but you can't know that for sure, because all of these things are so dynamic and in flux at the moment. Question now about being able to switch from ACT to SAT, even if you've already registered and paid for ACT exams. How would you advise a student in that position?
The two systems are totally separate. They're different companies. They're completely different organizationally and operationally. So any element of engagement with ACT will have no bearing on your engagement with the SAT. So if you've paid for ACT exams, like you've registered with that company, you may be able to cancel a registration and get a reimbursement, but that's fairly unlikely and it won't have any impact on the SAT. So I'd say if you like the SAT, go ahead and switch, register for that. That cost, the sunk cost, is relatively low compared to the value to you of playing to your strengths.
And I was gonna I was gonna see you just dismiss the question. I saw that, but the natural next question is, do we need, do students take both tests? Do we need both tests? And the answer is absolutely not. There are students who take both. It's very rare. You really should prep for the test that you think is the test for you. We can help you figure that out through our practice testing, through our tutoring, but you don't need both. There are no colleges that want to see both. Very few students would have the time to actually prepare well for both. So that's definitely not something that you want to be doing.
What I would
You can
go ahead,
technically do
Sylvia.
it, but we wouldn't
Yeah.
advise it. So that was
Right.
my quick answer to that student.
Yes. And
You have other asks on your time. So, picking what's play to your strength and prepare well for the one test is a huge task.
I've got one more note there, which is that rather than spending a long time preparing for both, what I would advise, if you don't want to decide yet, is don't prepare for either one and prep the fundamentals, things like grammar, things like math rules in algebra and geometry and trigonometry and in probability and statistics. Prep that stuff, then get more familiar, then make your decision, rather than keeping both tests going for a long period of time.
Great. We've got two really excellent questions. I want to throw this next one to Tim first, because I imagine you've been answering this for 20 years. So someone asks, I just took a practice test and didn't do well. How can I raise my score? How long will it take to get results?
That's funny. I was looking, I actually want the other one, but no, I'll start with this one. Look, these studying for the SAT and ACT, these are standardized tests. We often, and Dan and I were just talking about this today, we often say to students that these tests, learning to do well on these tests is a lot more like learning a musical instrument, learning to play a sport. They're different from learning, for example, to study for a math test in math class or learning a history test in history class, because they're standardized. It's the same set of skills. You learn by that rote, by practice over and over and over again, figuring out the topics you don't know, figuring out the timing that you need to get better at, and doing lots and lots of practice. Again, going back to what we just talked about, it's one of the reasons why it's important to have as much practice material out there. And these times of transition, when the testing companies have less material, can be a little bit more difficult to study for a particular type of test. So, the answer of how do you get better is practice, right? This is the old, how do I get to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice. So, just as you would with a musical instrument or with sports, these things, it's not about learning tricks overnight. It's about taking months. For some students, it's about taking 6 months or 12 months and taking a lot of practice and really zeroing in on your own or with a tutor to see, what are the things in grammar, math, et cetera, that you need to know, and really drilling on them and doing them over and over again. And also just to note that these scores go up and down. They're not, your progress is not going to be linear. It's a little bit, looks a little bit sometimes like a stock chart, right? It goes up, goes down, goes up, but you want to see the general trend going upward. And there's a lot of psychology in taking these tests. You can have an off day. You could be tired. You didn't eat enough breakfast before you went in there. You could have a bad day. So you just have to know that you can take one of these and do better the next time, as long as you keep learning, which that's what will bring me into the second question, and I'll move it over to you guys. Can you take the SAT too many times? In theory, no, because the colleges are simply going to input your best verbal and your best math scores, your best section scores, to create effectively what's called a best super score for your admissions. That's what the admissions people are going to be looking at. But, there is sort of a point of diminishing returns here. If you can't get the score that you really need to get, maybe you need to examine whether there are certain colleges you shouldn't be applying to. Maybe there are, maybe at a certain point you should be focusing on your schoolwork instead. It's not that the colleges would look askance at having you take the test 6 times. It's just that for you, there are better things to do with your time than take the test 6 times. And so there's a lot of practice material out there, a lot of ways to take real released and very good bespoke made, for example, practice tests, that you don't need to go sitting for the real test unless you are really ready to take it. So I think most students, we would probably advise take the test 2 or 3 times and then, call it a day and apply. Hopefully by that point, you've done your work and you get the scores that you want.
I'll jump in with something here, which is that I think you want to think about your progress as what are you doing different? And something we see, a mistake many students and families too, a mistake they make is they think if I just do more practice problems, then I will get better. And this is not true. That you can do all the practice in the world, but if you're doing it in the same way that you did your first month of practice, then you're not going to make much progress. That practice has to inform what you then do. If you do the practice, for example, and you see that you don't know about similar triangles, you keep getting those questions wrong, then you need to learn about similar triangles. Learn the rules, make sure you know how those questions work, go look for answer explanations online. You need to study things. You need to have those similar triangle formulas memorized so that stuff is recalled more quickly and more easily when you're on the test. Things like that. That practice has to inform a change to your technique. If you're taking the test just a month later and you've done nothing differently, I wouldn't say that's really worth it. That you want to feel like you have leveled up in your test taking skill and ability before you go in for that next test. So if you're going in for a 6th test, but you feel like you've done much better, then that's worth it. But if it's just the 6th test, the same as you've done the previous 5, not worth it.
This is even true of just taking practice tests too. I have a student right now who I just started working with a little over a month ago, who had taken a tremendous number of practice tests before even starting tutoring. And she was taking them like every weekend and wanted to continue on that train once we started working together. And I said, but when are you going to have time to practice learning what we're learning? Like, when are you going to learn? Give your brain the opportunity to relax, intake information, and to review, which is such an important thing that we talk about in tutoring and talk about in all teaching, hopefully all the time. You have to review what you learn, or it's not going to become something that you have a pathway to re-find. Memory doesn't work that way. So that's a really important part of the whole process and should be something that you take quite seriously when you think about how often you take the test. Also, you are a human person who has a life with many things happening and only so much energy. And if you're taking the test over and over and over, chances are you're going to see diminishing returns because you will be exhausted. And that's not how you would prepare for your I'm not athletic at all, so I was going to try to come up with a sports metaphor, but I couldn't. But hopefully for whatever sporting you're doing, you wouldn't make that choice either. I also want to add a thought about the question about changing score. And I just want to offer a word of caution that I give to all my students, which is do not affix meaning to a particular numerical leap. That's not what we're going for. We're going for one small goal at a time that's going to build up to that change in scores. And don't be afraid of a little bit of an up and down, because perhaps your verbal score dropped, but you got 3 more percentage questions right than the last test. And that's what we were working on, because that's been a sticking point. So that's not going to be something that necessarily shows up in I went up 100 points. That was my goal. That I think you're going to set yourself up for a lot of discomfort and efforting something that you can't necessarily control as much as you can control good practice and good work.
Yeah, I talk a lot with students about how if I tell them to go get a good score, there's nothing they can do to actually do that. But if they go in and they know that to get a good score, they need to turn on their answer eliminator and cross off at least 2 answer options for every single reading and writing question and write out their algebra formulas before they solve the question. Things like those are actual steps that students can take. They are technique. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the music analogy or the sports analogy. You're building your technique rather than just kind of rolling the dice. So that's what we're going for with this idea of structured practice and then reflecting upon how that practice went.
Next question builds, I think, quite naturally from this. Anonymous attendee asked, if I start practicing when school ends, when should I be ready to take the test? How do we answer that question?
Let's do this maybe for sophomores and juniors. That might be a way to break it down. Tim, what if somebody's starting late, like a junior who's coming to us now? It's just been crazy. They haven't gotten around to the SAT, but now school is ending. They've got a quiet summer after junior year. What do you tell them about that runway to trying to get the score they want?
Yeah, and this actually goes to the next question that also popped up about deadlines of when you can take your last SAT and ACT. I think if you're a junior and you're just kind of starting out at the end of junior year, which we definitely see, you actually have a fair amount of time to take these tests. There are tests offered over the summer. There are tests offered in the fall. And, in general, if you're applying to colleges early admission for the early cycle, you really need to try to get your tests done by October, maybe latest by November. If you're applying later, you most likely have at least through December for colleges. And occasionally for certain ED2 rolling admission type things, you could take the tests in January, maybe even February. But in general, you've got into the beginning of your senior year. And so, if you're a junior and you're thinking, oh, it's May, or even it was last month, it's April, you still potentially have 3, 4, 5, 6 months to prep for the test. And that should, for many kids, that's plenty of time. This sort of gets into the concept of how you best prepare. There are a lot of students who are better preparing for the test when school is in session. It's part of their normal program of study. They're doing a lesson an hour and a half every single week. It's just it's like picking up an extra course at school, and they do it during school. There are some students who decide, hey, I want to start working this summer. I'm not going away to camp. I don't have a job or whatever, or I have time to do this. I can do it more intensively. I want to do 6 intensive weeks of work and then take the test in August. There are a lot of students who do very well like that. And I think you have to know yourself a bit and come up with a plan that you're going to try to execute. And if it doesn't work, you can always amend it. But certainly we have sophomores who start the summer heading into junior year, and by December they're done. And there are others who need an extra test in March of junior year to be done. And I think you just have to be patient with yourself, which goes back to what Sylvia was saying before.
For sophomores, you've got a lot more time. We typically advise sophomores to take representative practice tests in the spring of their sophomore year. Take an SAT, a practice SAT, take a practice ACT, think about which test you're interested in. That also gives you a baseline score. You can say, all right, this is where I'm at, and that X value is where I want to be. That will give you a sense of the timeline. If you're trying for a perfect score, that's going to take a longer time than if you're trying to get an 80th, 90th percentile, because that's the score that the colleges you're looking at are looking for. So that's a more nuanced question. We see rising juniors, some are aiming to be done with testing by November, by October of their junior year. Some just want a real gradual timeline. They know that it's going to take a while and they don't want to add to their stress. So they're ready to just start a regular process. That's when, honestly, I would call us. We've been answering these questions about the path to test prep for 20 years. We have answered every single question under the sun about what nuances might inflect and how they might change a student's pathway. So please do call us for that. We'll share our contact info in the chat.
Yes. I will echo all of that and just briefly say too, this is super individualized. It's why we are bespoke tutoring, because we work with different students in different ways and different people are going to have different timelines. So there's no one fixed answer to that, though there are these pieces of really helpful general wisdom, but be prepared to work in your way and at your pace. You know yourself, and working with a tutor can allow another person to know you well, and they can offer really good advice about that. Question about tutoring versus group classes next. Do you recommend the one-on-one tutoring or the group SAT and ACT classes? And further, is there an opportunity for students to ask questions in the group? How many students are in a group? Dan, do you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. It's hard because there are an infinite number of kinds of students. Some students will really benefit from a one-on-one kind of attention from the very beginning. Some other students are happy working in a class and then taking their questions to Khan Academy and developing their strengths on their own. Another pattern that we've seen is students who will start in a group so they can get the foundational knowledge, get the baseline strategies, and then they'll transition to a one-on-one when they know what they need to work on. And then they will bring that to the tutor and say, this is the stuff that I really need to work on. And I look forward to pursuing it in that more focused way. I will say that one-on-one tutoring works. You get the private attention. You get to see, oh, this is really somebody, this tutor, somebody who knows me. They see where I'm making my mistakes. They hold me to account. They're more insistent that I get my homework done. If you're one person in a class who doesn't get their homework done, there's not as much pressure on you. There's not as much of that sense of obligation. So that can make a difference. But I would say for parents out there, students out there, think about what has worked for you in the past, not classroom settings where you've kind of floated by. Which are the settings which have really demanded a lot from you, that have held you to account, that have kept you at the top of your performance? That's the kind of setting that you're trying to replicate with your SAT or ACT tutoring.
A few technical notes, just the classes tend to be small. You're not going to end up in a classroom of like 30 kids who aren't getting the opportunity to ask questions. You'll absolutely be able to ask questions and get one-on-one attention from the teachers, but also potentially benefit from the learning style of others. So as Dan said, if that's the right environment for you, go for it. And if getting that one-on-one support is what you need, then we would encourage you to do that as well. Tim, did you want to add anything, or shall we move on to the next question?
No, I think we can move on. Yeah, that's
Well, I'm going to hand this back to you.
okay.
Question we hear a lot. Is test optional a real thing, particularly at the most selective schools?
It's a great question, and you will hear a lot of different answers depending on whether you're talking to the college counselor at school, talking to us, you're talking to an independent college counselor, you're talking to the colleges themselves. The answer is test optional is a real thing. During COVID, pretty much every school was test optional, and now more and more schools are coming back in to ask for the tests. What we have generally found is that even if students are applying to some schools that are test optional, I think the statistic is something like 80 or 85% of them are still taking the SAT or ACT, because if you don't do that, you're closing off a bunch of potential doors for yourself. And in general, the schools that we have found that are moving back to requiring the tests have been doing so in a way where they have been favoring kids who have been actually taking the tests, even though they are technically test optional. In other words, we're seeing more of those kids who actually did take the tests getting in, because the colleges have some important data points to go off of. And so we generally recommend, and I think more and more schools, particularly in New York, are recommending as well, that you should take the tests, because it's potentially lets you show off a bit more to colleges, gives them an important data point, and opens the door to being able to apply to more schools.
If you see test blind, that is genuine and 100%. Test blind means they don't even have a place for you to submit your score if you're applying to that school. So that's a school that says, we're just not looking at it. Test optional is a little more nuanced, as Tim said, and I'd say consult a professional, either the college advisor at your school, an independent college counselor, to really get the scoop on whether that's true for that school that you're looking at.
Excellent. One more question, though we do have a little bit more time, so if anyone thinks of another question as we are answering this one, please feel free to pop it into the Q&A or the chat. This question asks, I'm really good at math, reading and writing not so much. Besides taking practice tests, how can I improve my scores? I have some thoughts.
Go ahead, Sylvia, you start it.
Yeah, let's each
as
give
a
you
writing
something.
teacher, I have some thoughts. I say to students a lot, we all have superpowers, things that we are, areas in which we naturally excel, and things where we feel comfortable. And I think it's important as much as possible to recognize the pathways that exist between the skills where we feel really present and comfortable and the things that where we feel like we struggle a little bit. And one opportunity that you have on the SAT, for example, is in the grammar section. It is a precise and rule-based section, and working in such a way that you are taking in your grammar rules the way that you take in your math rules, and really committing them to memory and to your own understanding, and working with someone who can help you see them that way can be a really terrific opportunity to become a little more comfortable with those skills. Beyond that, there are also the same kinds of good test taking practices and strategies that exist for math sections in the reading and writing sections as well. So understanding where you can eliminate answer choices to lighten your cognitive load, to read questions in a really precise way, to use your highlighting and your understanding of keywords, which are really learnable skills. Also to have a growth mindset and to not say I'm bad at reading and writing, but instead, like I am developing in reading and writing. I am going to spend a little bit more of my energy there. And making this the gradual process wherein you can take some of what's working for you in reading and math, in math, and apply it, and also apply the good test taking practices, which really will open up a tremendous amount for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I've had some students who are terrific at one or the other, and that's a luxury. You can just focus on one of the topics, either the verbal part or the math part. And you can go in a few times and just see if you can really get that verbal score or that math score down. The biggest thing that students can be doing, particularly for the younger students or families here that have younger students, is making sure that they're reading as much as possible. And that's difficult in a world of social media, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. It's hard, but reading time, whether it's newspapers, novels, anything fun, just more reading is going to make you better at moving through the test. It's going to make you a faster reader. It's going to make you just more comfortable as a test taker.
I think
Um,
something which is not this isn't a new or cutting edge social critique, but the phones, the devices, they've really hurt our ability to focus in a deep way or for any length of time. And that is a skill that these tests reward. And so whatever adults can do to develop their focus, some of the same things students can do, putting down their phone for long periods of time, turning off notifications, trying to do something that really takes your attention for a good period of time. It's a muscle and it will be lost if it is not used. And so that's something which students need to be developing before the 3 months before they want to take their real test.
Absolutely. We've got two more questions. The first says, I get the timeline. How much time should I study in a week?
I've got a quick one there. I mean, one of the most important elements of test prep is regularity and consistency. And when it's not working, I'll see students who will do 2 practice tests in a day and then forget about the test for 3 weeks. And then they do another 2 practice tests, this kind of all or nothing approach. That is not a good approach and it's not successful. Even if maybe that person is spending more time, just in terms of hours per month on the test, than the student who's just doing a regular hour every week, the student who's doing the regular hour every week is going to do better because they are coming back to it again and again and again. That's why we say homework should be 20 to 30 minutes, 4 or 5 nights a week. Students don't have to go crazy. It's more about how frequently are they returning to the material, because that's going to make it more of just a normal day when they go in to take their real test.
And that's going to help build that focus muscle that is often compromised these days. I want to make a note that we had a question about like the college timeline, which is terrific, but not something that we have the time to answer in detail now. So I just want to encourage that attendee to give us a call. I'm going to be popping all of our contact information into the chat in just a moment. And we have incredible resources for you, including college counselors, to talk about that more in depth, just because it is a big topic and deserves the time that it would require. But we have a fantastic last question to end on. Tim, come back to you. Can you discuss a little bit about how Bespoke's approach to test prep is different and how it will help students do their best?
Yeah, and I'm going to also throw this to Dan after I take a quick stab at it, because Dan is in charge of all our tutoring, our curriculum, training our tutors, making sure they're as terrific as they are. So, you know, Bespoke's been around for more than 20 years. We have an incredible amount of expertise. We have spent an incredible amount of time with real experts developing our in-house materials, thousands of practice questions, practice tests. We do a lot of professional development and training with our tutors. We hire people who are experienced. They've been doing this already by the time they come to Bespoke for many years. And so when you come to Bespoke, you're getting not only administrators who are taking good care of you and looking out for you, but you're really getting some experienced people. And again, if we go back to, in my mind, that sports or music analogy, if you're going to learn the violin or you're going to learn to be a soccer player, then, you know, you want a violinist who plays at Carnegie Hall. If you want Messi, you want a great soccer player who's going to come give you those lessons. And I think that's, you know, what you're going to get, at Bespoke. I really believe that.
There's another apt metaphor that Peter Stadlin uses. If any of you have ever spoken with a person here at Bespoke, you've probably spoken with Peter. He says, even Babe Ruth had a batting coach. And even Roger Federer has a tennis coach. And the idea there is that even the people who are just at the very top, the topmost talent, need somebody who is perceptive and able, a good listener who knows the game to help that person get better. And when you're working with a Bespoke tutor, that's the kind of person you're working with, is we hire for perception, we hire for incredible people skills, good listening, tutors who know students, who can be aware. It's not just that this student doesn't know how to solve this math problem, it's that they're getting nervous when they're asked to solve this math problem. And that's what's actually getting in their way. And so that kind of people skill is another piece of what you're looking for in a tutor, which hopefully, if I've done my job right, we have hired for over these many years, we've trained for, and that we've really encouraged our tutors to dig into. How can you listen better? How can you pay better attention to your students? How can you learn more from the kind of work that they're doing? So really demanding, insisting on that level of perception and understanding from your tutor is a real great way to start. And that's what we're trying for here.
Really nicely said. Thank you both. We are at an hour. It finished up so nice and neat. I just want to point everyone's attention to the chat where our contact information is. You can email or call us if you have further questions about anything that we discussed this evening, and we hope that you will. We will also send a recording of this webinar, yes?
Yes.
And as we always do. And if you have folks in your life who you think would benefit from this conversation, be interested in participating in it further, want to know more about what we talked about and what we do at Bespoke, please share it with them. We are a word of mouth company. And so you are a super important and a dynamic part of that. And please continue to let us know what your questions are about these tests and all of the different things that we support your students through at our company. Tim, Dan, any final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you. And that, students with work and application and support have done incredible things when it comes to these tests, and that anybody can do that. So to encourage you in that pursuit.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Bye.